Hey guys, it's Jen. Welcome back to my channel. Today I thought I'd do some live swatches of the new Natasha Denona bronze palette, and I also want to show some comparisons with other palettes in my collection. So why don't we go ahead and jump right in and get started. Alright, so here's a quick look at the shades inside. I found that this palette has a really fall vibe to it. It's very warm toned overall, and it retails for $65, which is less than some of her regular sized palettes, which are $129. I do like that she's doing the smaller sized versions, just because usually with the bigger palettes I would never get through the shadows, whereas these are a little bit easier to pan for the average person. So I just feel like this is a much more manageable size for most of us, and it's a much more manageable price as well. Plus, Sephora is offering 500-point reward perks for $10 off. So if you have some points that you've been saving, you can always cash those in for a $10 reward and get the palette for $55. So anyway, let's go ahead and do some live swatches, and then we'll get into the comparisons. Alright guys, so just some initial thoughts on the formula. They feel just like her other shadows, so if you're familiar with those, you're going to be familiar with this as well. If you're new to her shadows, I would say these are ultra pigmented, especially the matte shades. So you can see when I swatch some of them, they tend to look patchy or look like they're grabbing to my skin, and that's because of the pigmentation that's in these. So it's just something to consider if you are not a good blender when it comes to putting it on your eyes. I tend to struggle with blending out eyeshadows, and I find hers to be a little bit more difficult for me. I have to spend extra time blending, but at the same time, the extra pigmentation makes them very long lasting, and also they stay where you put them instead of blending away. So if you like a shadow that's really going to grip to your eyelids and stay put, then you'll love these. Just be aware that it may take a little bit of extra blending on your part when it comes to the matte shades. And then also another thing to note, this matte shade Deep Dive is actually one of her cream shadows. So that has a different texture than the other mattes. And then when it comes to the shimmer shades, they all feel very buttery, particularly these two on the end right here, and then also this one in the middle. A few of them were a little bit on the chunkier side. They're a little more metallic. They have some glitter and therefore some fallout. So that's something to keep in mind as well. But overall, it's a really pretty warm tone palette. Alright guys, so let's go ahead and get into some comparisons. So this is palette number 1, and this is the J.Cat Beauty Sunset Boulevard palette, and this is the first one that I thought of when I initially saw the bronze palette launch, just because it has a really similar vibe going on. It looks, again, very fall-like. You have these coppers and golds, also the burgundy shade, and then you also have, which kind of makes it a little bit unique, because I know there's a lot of palettes out there with like the reds and oranges and coppers, but this palette also includes this kind of bluish purpley shimmer and matte shade. Same thing with the Natasha Denona. So that's kind of what stood out to me as making these two really similar, because they're like warm tone palettes with the addition of these cooler shades here and here. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Now, when it comes to the formula of the J.Cat palette, I'm not going to sit here and say it's the same as Natasha Denona, because it's definitely not the case. However, I will say that the shimmers in this palette are the strong suit. They're amazing. They're so buttery, so creamy. Some of them I feel like even beat some of the ones in the Natasha Denona, because I personally don't like those really chunky, glittery shimmer shades that have a ton of fallout. And these are just the smoothest, most buttery shadows. So I really love the shimmers in this one. on. But when it comes to the matte shades, these are a lot more powdery than the ones in the bronze palette. These, like I said before, are super pigmented and very, very like rich and densely packed, whereas these are more of like a loosely packed, very powdery kind of formula that you're going to need to pack on your lids and keep building and building. So think of like a Lorac shadow or Milani's new formula where you're really going to need to build up that color if you want it to show up. I would definitely use a primer for these matte shades just to give them a little bit more grip to your eyes. So let's go ahead now and take a look at some swatches. All right, so here's a look at the two side by side. The J.Cat row is on the top and the Natasha Denona on the bottom. Now, these are definitely not shade for shade exact dupes, but you can definitely get a very similar look with the J.Cat palette. It has a really similar vibe going on. All right, guys, so comparison number 2 is the Colourpop California Love palette. So again, this is another one that I thought of pretty quickly after I saw the promo photos of the new bronze palette. It has, again, a very similar vibe going on. The only thing that I feel like this one doesn't have are these two darker purple shades right here at the top. And it also has a pressed glitter, which the Natasha Denona doesn't have. So there's a couple of differences, but I think when you see the swatches, you'll see how close these really are. All right, guys, so here we have the California Love palette in the top row and the Natasha Denona on the bottom row. And I mean, these are really incredibly close. There's some shades that are spot on, like this copper one right here, and these browns. The Colourpop one has the micro glitter in it, but once it's on your eyes, because it's a matte shade, the glitter usually kind of buffs away and you're just left with the color behind. So I feel like that's really similar. This one is also really similar as well. These golds down here at the beginning and this matte brown. I mean, it's just like a very, again, similar vibe. It's not going to be an exact shade for shade dupe across the palette, but if you do have the California Love from Colourpop, you know already that the formula is amazing. I actually prefer Colourpop's formula to Natasha Denona. That's just my personal preference. And really, if you don't care about these kind of navy blue purpley shades in the bronze palette, then you're probably good because California Love, other than those two shades, is very, very close. All right, so next up, let's take a look at another bronze palette. This one is the Kylie Jenner Bronze Extended. And again, you have that really similar warm tone vibe going on. This palette also does not include these two darker shades over here, but other than that, it's full of warm tone neutrals. It has a matte ivory shade and then this kind of lighter, almost golden champagne color that this one doesn't have. It also has an olive green, which the bronze palette doesn't have, and it has this cooler toned, almost grayish taupe shade that this one doesn't have as well. But other than that, I did find quite a few similar shades, so let's go ahead and take a look at the swatches. All right, so here we have the Kylie palette along the top row and the Natasha Denona on the bottom. And again, I'm seeing a lot of similarities going on here. We have this shade, which pretty much is spot on. This coppery one as well. These gold shades are really close. This one, not so much. Then again, you have this like rusty red that looks super similar. This gold has a bit of green to it, whereas this one doesn't. So those are different. And then these two right here, again, very close. And then here you have more close shades. So similarly to the California Love palette from Colourpop, I think if you already have the Kylie Bronze palette, you may be able to go ahead and skip the Natasha Denona Bronze palette unless there's some shades in it that you really feel like you can't live without. All right, and then next up I have the Too Faced Extra Spicy Gingerbread palette. So I was basically just pulling out all my warm tone palettes, and when I saw these two in the pan side by side, I wasn't really thinking that they were going to be as close as they are. I knew that the Gingerbread Extra Spicy has a lot of really like warm tone shades, again, very similar to this one. But never did I imagine that once I swatched these two together that they would be so incredibly close. And that happens to me so often, more often than you would think. So let's go ahead and take a look at some swatches. All right, so here we have Gingerbread Extra Spicy in the top row and Natasha Denona on the bottom. And I mean, look at this, you guys. Look at how many shades line up. Now, again, some of them are not exact matches, like this top one right here, but then you have this one that's so close, this one, These two are not as close as I thought they were going to be based on looking at them in the pan. These shades are almost identical. The golds, I mean, there is so much that really lines up between these two. And I think so many of these shades are going to look basically the same on your eyes, even if they don't look the same exactly in a swatch. And the Too Faced formula is amazing. If you already have this palette, I'm sure you probably love it like I do. I'm not sure if it's still around. I know for a while it was on QVC still for purchase, but it was limited edition. So once it's gone, it's gone. Unfortunately, it's one of my favorite palettes, and I also prefer the formula of the Too Faced to the Natasha Denona. Next up, we have the Soft Glam palette from Anastasia Beverly Hills. Looking at these two side by side, I do see a lot of similarities going on, but the Anastasia palette has some differences as far as having a matte black shade, which this one doesn't. You also have like some pinks and this dusty purple, which this one doesn't have as well, but you do have a lot of the same warm tones going on. These two golds in the ABH palette, with the exception of bronze, are more on the lighter side, whereas the golds in the bronze palette are much deeper and richer. You also have this reddish coppery shimmer in this palette that you don't have in the ABH, so there are definitely some differences between the two, but let's go ahead and take a look at the shades that are the same. So as you can see, this is another case of things being similar but not exact dupes. I did find a couple that really do look exact, like this one here. This brown is almost exact. This one is pretty close. I feel like once it's blended out on the eye, it would look pretty much the same. Even these pinks right here, this one in the Natasha Denona has a little bit of a shift to it, while this one doesn't. But again, I think once they're on the eyes, they might look very similar. And then even these deeper shades here, you have Cypress Umber in the ABH palette, which is more of like a cool tone, deep brown. And then you have Deep Dive in the bronze palette, which is more like a purplish color. But because they're both cool tone, they're both really dark, I think they would look very similar once they were blended out on the eye as well. Alright guys, and then last but not least, I have the Wet n Wild My Glamour Squad palette, since this is an almost dupe for Soft Glam from Anastasia, and that one was close to the bronze palette, so I figured this one might be too. Even though it is a little bit smaller, it has 10 shades versus 15. So why don't we go ahead and take a look at the swatches. Alright, so here we have the Wet n Wild swatches on top and the bronze palette on the bottom, and pretty much all the same shades that were similar in Soft Glam are the same in this palette as well. Again, I think you have some really close matchups going on, and even the ones that don't completely match up would look very similar once they are on your eyes. But if you were really just looking for those warm toned rich colors, I feel like the Wet n Wild has so many similarities going on that you may feel like you don't necessarily have to go out and buy the bronze palette. Alright guys, so that's everything that I found in my collection that looked really similar to this palette. I hope this video was helpful to you, and if it was, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Also, I would love to have you subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss out on any future videos. I definitely plan to do some more dupes and palette comparisons, and also don't forget to check out my main channel, Jen Phelps, which I'll leave linked down below. Thank you guys so much for watching and hanging out with me, and I will see you all in my next video. Take care guys. Bye!